Hello friends, Tanya here for Spellbinders, and today I am going to be working with several of the club kits for February 2023. We're going to start out with the Floral mini tiles. This is the die of the month kit, and you can see that there are lots of layering options with this set. There are several geometric shapes and some flowers that you can layer on top of each of these different kind of tiles. Now I'm going to assemble one each of these tiles. Here we've got a couple of 5-petal flowers. There are some with some extra etched details and some that are plain. And you can layer them up in any number of ways. Here I've got 3 layers together, 2 of the 5-petal flowers, and a lovely center. Now, there are several different tiles that use the same flowers. There's some little tiny daisy type flowers, some fuller flowers, and then more of a tulip or bell-shaped flower. Lots of different ways you could do this. I personally went a little overboard with these. I cut out 12 different colors and of each of these styles, and then went to town making the flowers out of the same colors. I did throw white in there and a brushed gold cardstock to replace the greens, and I made 12 tiles of each style. That is 4 dozen tiles. And then I told myself I was going to use every single one of those tiles. Well, I certainly tried my best on this video, and this is a long video. I hope you will stick around to watch all of it. I am making 10 cards with these different kits, and I combine them in a variety of ways. I did leave the assembly of these different tiles here in case that is something you are interested in seeing. It was actually quite therapeutic. I did spend several hours one day creating all of these different tiles, and it was very zen, I'm telling you. I just put on a series on Netflix, sat down at my kitchen table, and assembled all of these different pieces, and I really enjoyed it. I actually even went back and made some more of the larger 2 kinds of flowers that did require assembly, but so that I would have them available to create more designs on the cards and to bring that design to the inside of the card. It's nice to have that availability or that flexibility to add extra pieces while you're creating without having to go back and die cut more and assemble more items. These really came out quite beautiful, and I thought that maybe I went a little too bold with my colors, but when I chose my colors, I was really just looking for a beautiful rainbow of colors to incorporate in our cards. And since it is the dead of winter here where I live in Minnesota, the colors that I am currently enjoying are white, light blue, brown, and some evergreen. Those are the colors of my great outdoors right now, and probably for lots of you also. Here is a close-up look at each of those tiles so you can see what they look like when they're assembled. And here are all of my finished tiles waiting to be used on projects. I sorted them by shape in each of these bowls. Next, I took the solid shape of each of these tiles and I cut a bunch of them out with some scrap white cardstock. You can see that these have some printing on them, but I just chose the areas that did not have any printing. Here I have a handful of these white tiles, and we're going to bring in the 3D embossing folder of the month. This one's called Spring Burst. This is for February. And this is the embossing folder of the month, Hydrangea Blooms. I like to write the names of these on my folders so that I have a name to reference. Here they are, all of those shapes embossed with the embossing folders. I love the extra detail that gives. And we're going to move into our first card, finally. We're going to layer our detail piece onto the solid background. You could do this with a contrasting color, a coordinating color. You could really skip the flowers on the front and just do the detailed. It would be pretty with some jewel tones and metallics, but I wanted to just stick with this. Next, we're going to pull out the Essential Diamonds dies, and we're going to use those behind our mosaic dot tiles here. I'm taking the largest two and I'm cutting them out of a pearlized cardstock for the larger and plain white cardstock, and then also embossing that with the Hydrangea Blooms, or the embossing folder of the month. We'll layer those together to create a backdrop behind our tiles. Then we're going to adhere each of these tiles on the diamond. Now this is taking a rounded shape and fitting it within the sides, or excuse me, within a very rigid angled shape. But this actually works out very well. I really like the contrast of the rounded shape within the very clearly defined edges of this diamond. And I'm just using the points of each of these mosaic pieces to line those up with the top and bottom. And then on the sides, I am drawing an imaginary line across the center to align up the centers of each of these mosaic pieces. Now, when I was assembling this, I should have thought a little bit more about placement of where I wanted the sentiment. But as always, I'm just going with the flow and creating as I go. I don't often have a real plan. Next, I took a piece of white cardstock, ink blended it with the shaded lilac, embossed it with the Hydrangea Blooms embossing folder, and now I'm coming in with Mermaid Lagoon and Peacock Feathers Distress Oxides and going lightly over the tops of that embossing. I really like how these colors played together. I really, seriously, this is going to be a new favorite blend for me. I love how all of those cool colors play together. Now we'll center our diamond in the middle of that. I trim this down to, I think this is 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. We're placing this on a 5 by 7 card base. And had I to do this again, I would create a smaller panel for this. I would want a larger white border. I might cut it down to 4.5 by 6.5, or even down to 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 for a nice wide border. Next, we're pulling out this wonderful script sentiments from the Yana Smakula line. This is from this year, and it's got a shadow and a fine detail layer here. I've cut those the white out of white cardstock and layered it 3 times, and then added the gold detail piece on top of that. So they would all have similar heights to the rest of the designs on this card. And I just tucked that in the corner. This is a leftover piece of that embossed and inked cardstock that I use for the front of the card, and I'm just going to take this scrap and add it to the inside of the card inside of the card, to bring some of the details from the outside of the card inside. And this is one of the quickest and easiest ways to do that, by just using a scrap from the front. Now that that's all adhered, that is my first card. For card number 2, we're going to ink blend a rainbow of soft colors here. I'm showing you each of them. And I am going to start out with the yellow, move to the green, the blue, and the purple. I'm going back and forth and blending each of these. I am not showing you all of the ink blending because this is a very long video already, but it is nice to see just a little bit of it. Next, we're going to take that Hydrangea Blooms embossing folder of the month, and we'll emboss that. I trim it down to the size I want to use for another 5 by 7 card. I take out a little mini sanding block, and I'm going to sand off the tops of the embossed areas so that it shows white through again. Now, if you have some cardstock that is white in the center, that works great with this technique also, but I really wanted that rainbow look. I did add a little bit of scrap cardstock behind our panel here, And it appears that I cut this to 6.5 by 4.5 inches to fit on our 5x7 card base. Next, I'm taking the teardrop shape or petal shape mosaics, and we're going to use this circle as a base, and I'm going to eyeball placement of this. I am not perfect. This is ultimately off just a little bit on one, off center just a little bit. But I think I can be forgiven, as can you. It does not have to be absolutely perfect. You could draw a grid on here to help with your placement, but I did not feel the need to be that precise. Now that I have each of those rainbow of tiles applied, I'm going to off-center this main element and adhere that down. I did put a couple layers of cardstock behind that for a little bit of elevation. Next, I used the sentiment from the Glimmer of the Month kit. It is a tulip set, and this sentiment is included with a die to cut it out. This says sending flowers and a smile, which I think is just perfect for this. And that was card number 2. On to card number 3, and this ink blending will be the same for all of the cards for the next 4 cards. I did several panels of this, and we're going to bring out the die of the month, the large die of the month, Spring Reflection. And we're going to use these beautiful framing elements. This is sized for an A2 card, and you can see what I have left on the right there. And I'm actually going to die cut the oval with the coordinating die here and set that aside for future use. Now that I have these 2 framing pieces, I have a piece of cardstock that I cut to 4.5 by 6.5 inches, and I'm going to emboss this with the 3D embossing folder of the month, Spring Burst. This is a deeply embossed, multi-layer embossing, and I think it is just gorgeous. It adds a perfect touch behind these very detailed leafy frames. We'll adhere this to our 5x7 card base, just using some good liquid glue. This is the Barely Art glue. It is my favorite. If you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. I am putting a piece or my Misty over the top to let that dry really well. And after that has dried, I am going to take my fine tip glue and add glue just to the edges. And this is the tiniest amount. And then I add a dot of glue on each of the leaves that is not connected to something else. Those are the pieces that are likely to try to pop up after you have adhered the entire piece. So I'll carefully line this up so that it has even borders above and below, and so that it has a nice even edge on the side, or a straight edge. Then I will go ahead and match the other side up so that it's got the same border on the sides and lines up with the middles of the other piece. And that actually went quite easily. I did not add any extra dimension behind these layers, but you certainly could if you wanted to. Next, I take the oval of vellum that I created using the die from the large die of the month, and these hexagon or octagon. Hexagon? They have 6 sides. So I think it's hexagon. I'm taking these tiles and I have created a grouping of 4, and it's very easy to line these up. You just use your straight edges and try to space everything evenly. And clearly I am enjoying combining soft and hard edges together for that contrast. Here we have all of our pieces adhered down. I'm trying to be gentle with that vellum. I'm not going to raise this up. I could have, but I decided not to. Again, just adhering that straight down with dots of glue behind the solid pieces of those tiles. So that is most of the front of the card. I'm going to pull out the August 22 Glimmer of the Month, and I want one of these sentiments. It has a coordinating die. We're going to take a piece of ink blended cardstock. This is ink blended with Distress ink in Candied Apple, which coordinates with the ink blended detail piece that's die cut. I foiled that with some polished brass glimmer foil, and then I'm going to die cut the sentiment and a couple extra layers to layer behind it to give it a little extra depth and strength. Then we'll adhere that to the card front, right nestled into our main design element, getting a good solid adherence to that front. Then I'm going to take a couple of those extra flowers that I talked about and the inside card glimmer sentiments. This came out last month with the Anemone blooms. I've foiled that in polished brass also and die cut that with a mini Slimline die, mini Slimline precision layering die. I find those dies very handy for sentiments in addition to creating layers for mini Slimline cards. I'm going to adhere that sentiment to the inside of the card and then add our pretty little blooms on each side of our sentiment. And that sentiment says the world is a better place with you in it. I think that is a wonderful sentiment. Next, we're going to make a couple of mini Slimline cards. We're going to use both of the embossing folders, the Pocket Bunny clear die and stamp of the month, the mini tiles and the spring reflection, and the precision layering Slimline dies. So almost all of the kits that I have this month. So I've used the precision layering dies to die cut a matte and a detail piece. So we're going to adhere the ink blended portion, which is just a sliver of this is going to show, and we're going to adhere that to a 6x3 or a 3x6 mini Slimline card base. Then we're going to take our embossed cardstock layer that was again cut with the precision layering die first, and then get that nicely lined up with our mat. I'm going to do this on 2 different card bases, both with the same dimensions, and I am going to use a different embossing folder for the second card. So the first one used the Spring Burst, the 3D embossing folder, and the second one we're going to use the Hydrangea Blooms, which is the embossing folder of the month. I don't know about you, but I love embossing, all of the different kinds of embossing, and I love to make a variety of different card sizes. You'll see in this video that I make 5x7 cards, mini Slimline cards, and at least one A2 size card. This size of embossing folder gives you the flexibility to make pretty much any size card. And I don't know that I will buy embossing folders that aren't this size in the future, just because I really enjoy not having to try to figure out how to make a 5x7 card with, say, a 6x6 embossing folder or an A2 sized embossing folder. It's so much easier when it's actually designed to create things in the size that you like to use. We're going to again line up these different tiles. I'm using groupings of 3 for these, and I've got this this almost reminds me of a Christmas bulb or Moroccan tiles. There's lots of different styles that this reminds me of. So I'm using this lovely rounded edged piece to create this card. I'm just going to line up the tips of these pieces with the ends of that detailed piece. Now, those different frames from the large die of the month kit do not have to be used on an A2 size card. Now, the first time we used this in this video, we used it on a 5x7 card, and I think it still looked gorgeous. Here we're using it on a mini Slimline card, and you can see how it frames up quite nicely inside the confines of a 3x6 card. I did use my precision layering dies to determine what size, or help determine what size those layers would be by laying the detail die inside them to make sure we would have a good size match there. I am creating an asymmetric look here. This stamp is from the clear stamp of the month. It says it says have a beautiful day. I'm trying to keep these cards very general themed so I could use them for just about anything, whether it's thank you or birthday or just saying hi, anything that I might want to use it for. You could be much more specific if you like. I personally need a stash of cards that has high flexibility because I just don't know who I'm going to give each of these to. Again, adding just dots of glue in strategic places after I've outlined the entire piece before I adhere it to the card front. This one we're going to use some diamond shapes, and these diamonds actually coordinate very well with the Essential Diamonds dies. And I did not think of that when I started this, but I do think sometimes it's nice to not be too matchy. Again, we've got soft and hard here because the lattice lattice effect on the detailed die has some rounded edges with that oval incorporated in there, and they've got little diamonds in between. I'm just going to add these so that they line up nicely and evenly spaced. I do love the fact that these tiles all seem to line up very easily. That is one of the beauties of geometric shapes. They make it very easy to design with. I could have added a fourth here, but I wanted to leave space for our sentiment. Because I don't always plan very well, I tried to do a little better with this combination of cards. In keeping with the thought that I wanted these to be very general cards until I know what I want to do with them, I did not put anything on the inside. I may add some flowers in the future. Here is card number 6. We're going to create an A2 size card. This might be the only A2 sized, I speak so well, A2 sized card in this entire video. Just because I really love 5x7 and mini slimlines and all of the varieties. I've been making A2 size cards for so long it almost feels boring. I like to stretch my creative muscle and figure out how to use my supplies in different sizes. So we're using this oval lattice style frame, which I love. These are my favorite components of the large die of the month kit. And there's some beautiful layering flowers in this with that are bigger versions of the ones for the mini mosaic tiles. Now, since I'd put all the work into all of these tiles, I didn't do any of the layering with the large die of the month for this video. I may do that a separate video with some of that at a later date. Leave me a comment in the below. Let me know what you think. Do you think I need to make a video with the die of the month layering features? Is that something you'd be interested in seeing? Let me know. I am layering 4 of these. No, is it 4 or 3? I have to look in my stack. It is 3. I used 3 of these. Again, like I did on the mini slimline, and they're layering very nicely. As you can see, I have a gradient from pink to orange to yellow. I'm trying to add some color balance as I'm creating these. And then we're going to use the tulip border sentiment. I hadn't shown you this earlier, but we have used this sentiment before. This is also some candied apple ink blended cardstock that I foiled in polished brass again. And I'm going to trim this sentiment down. Now, if this was a stamp, you'd probably trim the stamp and then the finished product. However, this is not. You can't cut your plate. You have to foil it the way it is, and then you can trim it down as needed. I do add some extra cardstock behind these different strips, and I needed to trim this in order to get it to fit in here the way I would like. Now, I could have tucked that down a little further to add a little more balance between the bottom and the top hexagon. However, I think this looks good like this too. That's the front of this card. And I do decorate the inside of this card. I pull out the sentiments for every day, foil and cut set, and I find a sentiment that I think would look good on the inside. It says, "You make my heart smile." And I foiled that again with some polished brass foil, and I'm going to adhere that to the inside. I did use my mini Slimline precision layering dies to die cut that sentiment again. And we'll add a couple of these pretty little flowers on the inside. I am really grateful for the forethought I had to make some of these extras. Next, for card number 7, we're going to emboss with the Hydrangea Blooms embossing folder. And then we're going to take some, actually, did I do this first? Yes. I am using some milled lavender distress oxides, and I'm going to cover this entire panel of cardstock. I think I started with a 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece of cardstock. I do like to make it bigger than I intend for the end, and I cover the entire thing. And then I am going to emboss with the Hydrangea Blooms folder. And then I'm going to take a couple more colors of ink, like I did in the first card, and I'm going to rub them across the embossed areas on our panel. I've got scattered straw and is this bundled sage? No. Yeah, it might be. No, it's shabby shutters. So I've got a very pastel-y, vintagey yellow and green to go with this lovely vintage muted pink purple color. I think this is a beautiful, charming color combination. It's very spring-like. I'm also going to spritz it with some pearlized water, which is water with Ranger Perfect Pearls inside, and it creates a shimmery shine to your project. I did trim this down to probably 4.5 by 6.5 inches. Yes, that's what that looks like. Added a little bit of extra cardstock on the back to add some stability and straighten out some of the warping from all of my fiddling. And then we're going to use this pocket bunny. I think that stamp is so adorable. I love the stamp set this month. Next, we're going to pull out the Picot Petite ovals, and I've die cut the second from smallest. And then I'm going to take some milled lavender ink. I thought I might have enough on my ink pad, on my ink blender, but I did not. So I did have to pull out my ink pad, which I had freshly re-inked after I ink blended that large panel, because it took a little longer than it really should have to ink blend that big piece of cardstock. So I'm being very delicate because I want a very light shadowing behind our bunny just to break up the harshness of the white and make it fit with the feel of the rest of the card. So I come back and add a little more of the milled lavender until I'm happy with the little vignette or shadowing behind our bunny. Now that I have that figured out and my background panel has adhered, I'm going to take my oval and put that a little off center on our card front. There are a couple layers of scrap cardstock behind both the oval and our bunny, which I die cut the bunny piece with the coordinating die. I love that about these sets, and that these sentiments are all have a coordinating die for them. And this says, "Sending a pocket full of happiness." I think that is so adorable and so versatile. You can use this card for a lot of different occasions. I really enjoy the versatility. Then we're going to take another of the images from that clear stamp of the month. This one does not happen to have a coordinating die. It is a cute little bunny on a swag of greenery and flowers. I stamped that in the shabby shutters, and then I am taking another one of the sentiments and using VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink on the inside, and it just says, "Have a beautiful day." I thought this was missing a little something, so I'm using some Aura opalescent sequins from the Spellbinders shop. And I'm adding those as a beautiful little addition to the embellishment of the front of this card. I have 3 groupings of 3 sequins here, trying to bring your eye mainly to the main elements of this card. And I don't know if I do it justice here on this video, but there is a lot of beautiful shimmer and shine. For card number 8, we're using this combination of peacock feathers, mermaid lagoon, and a shaded lilac. We're also going to create a slimline border. I'm using this beautiful cutout die, and I'm figuring out what part of this I want to die cut with this fallout piece. I'm lining up these diamonds, which I have all held together in the configuration I've been planning, with some press and seal. That's one of my secret weapons. I'm using my grid mat to carefully line that up on this piece of cardstock that I've already trimmed down to 4.5 by 6.5. I also have a 3D embossed piece here that is cut to the same size. That's using the spring burst. Now, I did make a mistake here. I intended to have the dots and the cut line flipped. I wanted those going in the opposite direction than what I actually ended up cutting them, but we're going to make it work. It still creates a good, nice die cut beveled edge here for me. So next I'm going to take some scrap cardstock pieces and put those behind our ink blended and die cut element and our embossed element. We'll add that to our 5 by 7 card base. And then I will add our die cut and ink blended piece, lining that up with the left hand side of that embossed panel. I just wanted a little bit of height on this to create that shadow effect and maximize the impact of that fallout die. Now that that is all well adhered after placing it under my MISTI for a few minutes, actually probably only a minute or 2, I'm going to add our diamonds that I've laid onto the card front the way I want them to be laid in. Then I'm picking each of them up, adding some glue to the back and adhering them to the front of the card. We've got a flow of color from purple to blue to green across the front of this card, and I really love how this turned out. Now the fallout pieces kind of have a diamond effect to them also, and that might have been why I was drawn to them. Next, we're going to use the wonderful script sentiments, again from the Anemone Blooms collection that came out last month. And we're going to die cut the Hello Beautiful sentiments with their coordinating shadows. I do like to layer all of this up, and I thought it might be helpful to watch how I get the fine detail onto the shadow. I just carefully start either in the middle of a large word, which I'm going to do with the beautiful here, after I add some little dots of glue all along our sentiment, and it doesn't have to cover the entire thing. Just needs some strategic application of the glue. And you can either start on one end and carefully work your way across, or you can start in the middle. I find it more useful to start in the middle with a long word. So I'm going to line up the T and the F using the tip of my tweezer to get things lined up exactly where they need to go, and then move towards one end and then back over to the other end. And it actually comes together quite nicely. The secrets here being a good fine tip glue like the Barely Art glue and a reverse tweezer. It makes things so much easier because my big clumsy fingers would never be able to hold on to the very fine details of these words. Now I did take some additional die cuts of scrap cardstock to put behind parts of the words here because we need to negotiate the differences in height from the right side of the card and the left side of the card. I did not use a ton of dimension behind these different layers, but there is some difference, and you don't want your card or your sentiment to be all wonky on there. I did use a heavy acrylic block, to add some pressure so that it will hold that word down to dry while I'm working on the first part of the sentiment. This is going to say, hello, beautiful, and again, is perfect for all kinds of different situations. And depending on the guy, you could even give this to a guy. And now that we've finished the outside, it's time to finish the inside. I pulled another one of the inside card Glimmer sentiments from the Anemone Blooms collection, and I embossed that, I foiled that with either some polished brass or some gold glimmer foil. And then I'm going to adhere that after I've die cut it with the precision layering Slimline dies. And this one says, I hope your day is as special as you are, friend. I also used a couple more of those extra flowers that I created. Again, so thankful I did that. For card number 9, we're finally going to pull out the Tulip Border Glimmer of the Month kit. This is gorgeous. I love this glimmer foil kit. I can see using this over and over and over again, and I want to make a bunch of Mother's Day cards with this. I've foiled this in polished brass on some white cardstock. This is Hammermill cardstock. You could use Spellbinders specialty cardstock. I use both, but primarily the Hammermill. There are coordinating dies for this sentiment and for the edge of the tulip border. This is gorgeous. I have this on a much larger piece than I need, but I'm going to just use my paper trimmer here to trim off the edges and make this into a smaller piece that's a little more manageable. Once I have this trimmed down, I'm going to pull out my Copic markers and color this. I've got a group of red purples, a group of yellow oranges, and a group of blue purples or blue violets. And I'm going to start with my lightest color, go to my medium tone, and then with my darkest, and I'll come back with some of the lighter tones to blend that out just a little bit. But I want my feathered marks to show fairly nicely on these. There are some really amazing multicolored tulips out there, and I want to give that impression even if I am not super detailed with that. I've seen lots of these tulip cards, and I'm telling you, this is a favorite among the influencers that created with these. This tulip glimmer foil is just stunning and so easy to work with. I look forward to using this on all kinds of different mediums. And some of them I will just do the glimmer foiling without any kind of coloring. I've shown you one each of the flowers that I created in the different colors, and now I'm just going to show you a little bit of the greenery. I do use 3 colors for the greens here, a light, a medium, and a dark tone in the greens. I don't remember what they were, and I really have decided to free myself from worrying about exact color combos. I really encourage you just to go to your marker collection and start grabbing. Don't fuss too much about your combos. You don't have to create exactly the same colors. That being said, there are not a lot of purples in the Copic line. That is a little bit lacking. But these all turned out gorgeous. I did decide to come in with a YG, I think 4 zeros, to add a little bit of fill in between here. I didn't want it to be a really dark green. I just wanted that subtle green tint. Next, I'm going to take this blend of 3 yellows and add a foiled background. This is the Hypnotic background. I think it came out in like August. I think it's a beautiful sun ray style, or it could be all kinds of things, but I'm choosing to use it as a sun ray style. I'm going to foil this with, is this Aura? Yes, this is Aura Glimmer Foil, and it turns out gorgeous. Just going to let that cool a little bit before I peel off the foil layer, and look at that, just stunning. And now it's time to trim that down. I'm again going to trim that down to 4.5 by 6.5 to go on our 5 by 7 card base. I've also layered some cardstock scraps behind that panel just to give it a little extra height. Now that is like 80-pound cardstock. It's pretty lightweight, and it adds just a touch. Now I've trimmed this down with a 5 by 7 layering die. I added another layer of scrap paper behind that, and I'm going to add this just a little bit above the bottom of the card. I'm actually lining it up with the bottom of that Glimmer foiled panel. I just wanted a little bit of border underneath it, but I wanted this to stretch all the way across. Part of that is because I didn't want to have to cut off any more of those gorgeous flowers than I had to. Next, I'm using that sentiment from the stamp set, and then inside I foiled another panel of these tulips with the satin pastels, and this happens to be lavender on white cardstock. And I took the lightest of the red violet, I think it was the lightest of the red violet, to add color to the flowers, and then that very pale yellow green to add color to the leaves. And then I added a little bit of sparkle with a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen. You could use Twinkle, what is that called? Wink of Stella. Whatever you like. And that was card number 9. Now we're moving on to card number 10. We're using another one of these adorable images from the Pocket Bunny stamp set. And I've die cut that and colored it with Copics. We're going to pull out our Hydrangea Bloom embossing folder of the month and emboss this 3 by 6.5 piece of cardstock with that after I've ink blended it with some squeezed lemonade distress ink. Next, I'm going to use the scattered straw embossing, distress oxide ink, and add that lightly over the top of our design and spritz it with pearlized water. We're going to pull out the Romantic Slimline borders and the Create a Slimline border die, and I've die cut those on the edges of this 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 inch panel. And I'm going to glue those to another panel that's cut to the same size. And I was a little crooked on one of my edges, but we're just going to camouflage this by being super careful. Now I did get a little smudge in the corner of that panel, and I'm using my pencil eraser to try to remove that. Ultimately, I take my little sanding block and sand out that imperfection, and you would never know. Now we're going to adhere this to our 5 by 7 card base, and that 3-inch piece was actually 3 inches by 6 3/4 inches. And I got those measurements by looking at the space that was available between the two border dies and trimming it to just a little bit under that. So 3 inches is what I got. And that actually fits behind our cute little bunny in an Easter egg image perfectly. Now we'll adhere that on our embossed and inked and beautified panel. And we're going to use the Hopping By to Say Hi sentiment. And then we're going to add these Aura opalescent sequins again. Now I put a lot more sequins on this card, but I wanted it to follow from one corner to the other of the card, and I have gobs of these sequins and I would like to use them. I really like how they add just that extra touch and fill some of that white space so that it doesn't feel too minimal. Since it is a more vintage style, I love the spring colors of this, and it turned out just so fun. On the inside of the card, I'm taking the scattered straw distress oxide, and I'm going to stamp that on the inside of our card. Notice I'm not using my MISTI. I'm just going to use a block. I have some well-inked ink pads, and just giving it enough time to just sit on the cardstock will help get a beautiful stamped image. We're using that same Have a Beautiful Day sentiment on the inside. So that's all 10 of my cards. Here's a quick recap of each of those cards. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done that, and check that description box below for all of the supplies that I used today. I would love to hear a comment of what your favorite parts of this video were and what you would like to see me create in the future. Until next time, here are a couple more videos I thought you might enjoy. Bye-bye.